Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Light Sports Ramble. Little special Veterans Day episode with my co-host Evan Witalison. We're going to recap the Packer game. We're also going to talk about the quarterback situation. And Evan, it just seems like our quarterbacks keep getting hurt. So I don't know what's going on there. But this is going to be a very special Light Sports Ramble, Veterans Day and Packer recap. So I'm going to, just like always, Evan, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you recap the game for our loyal listeners.
Well, first thing I want to say is thank you to all the veterans that served this country, currently serving or served at one point. Thank them all for everything that they've done for this country, and especially for those that made the ultimate sacrifice. Out of the game from Sunday, just a lot of things didn't go well on Sunday. Packers left a lot of points on the board as, we ended up having to go with our third-string quarterback when Wallace got hurt, and then we had two missed field goals. Tolzein had an interception in the end zone that almost got returned for a touchdown that thankfully ended up leading to a missed field goal by the Eagles. And, Nelson had a drop in the end zone it looked like he caught it to me, but, further review it, referees upheld the call and saying it was incomplete. And just left a lot of points on the board offensively and defensively. The mistakes that we saw back in week one crept up once again, and that's safeties not communicating properly, missing routes, especially those routes over the middle, doing the post and the post corner routes they didn't play well. Tackling was an issue again. And didn't get any pressure on the quarterback. And the quarterback had all day to throw. The D-line kept getting out of their rush lanes, and Foles, who is not mobile whatsoever, was able to make a couple plays with his feet and kept drives alive. And we were biting on that draw play often, especially on that final drive of the fourth quarter where Foles sets up the throw, gives it to McCoy, and McCoy gets a good chunk of yards. And then that read option stuff, we're having trouble defending that once again. So a lot of issues that we saw in week one crept back in, and it just didn't get the outcome that we wanted. But, the Packers did put up a fight, and Tolzein, with the situation he was thrust in, did a pretty serviceable job, except for two very bad, crucial interceptions, which one of them, I don't know what he was thinking throwing that ball. The second interception, I counted 5 Eagle jerseys to one Packer player, and he still put the ball in that area. So, but, we'll see what happens against the Giants next week.
Yeah, well, I think the interception you're talking about is the one that was tipped. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, where he shouldn't even threw it in that area to begin with because there were 5 Eagle players within the general vicinity.
Yeah, when you watch,
it wasn't going to end well.
Yeah, and they showed the view from the end zone, and I'll actually, before I get started, I'll tell you, and I was telling you this before, I actually made it all the way through the airport, all the way home, without getting one inkling of what happened during the Packer game yesterday, because yesterday was my travel day back from California, and then I had to come back to freezing cold weather. So I was pretty proud that I made it all the way, 7:45 Pacific time to 6 o'clock Eastern time. Then I had to drive an hour and a half home, and I didn't even hear one update on the Packer game all day. I was I was impressed. I didn't think that would happen. And then, of course, I was let down when I watched the game last night when I got home. But to get into what you're saying, and where I'm living now in Steeler Nation, the meeting I was at, we have 3 schools in Philadelphia, Evan. And so I made a bet. So don't get mad at me, Packer fans, when I have to post a picture with me wearing an Eagles hat because I bet on the game. But the thing, Evan, is that I heard today in email, and I got a bunch of them, that the Eagles rule, the Packers suck. And I totally exactly. I totally disagree. The Eagles were not the Eagles were better yesterday, but I don't think they're a better team. I think that we went out and we left a lot of points on the field. Minimum that I counted, and this is a minimum, and I know you and I talked about it a little bit, but we missed 2 field goals. Now, granted, one hit the upright and just missed enough, but had he made those two, there's 6 more points. The interception on a great drive. I mean, what was it? 17 plays, 91 yards.
Yep.
And it ends in an interception. And then, late in the game, I was not upset that McCarthy went for it on 4th down. I thought it was the right move. But had we put up the other 13 points earlier, we may have just had to kick a field goal there. And so what I'm seeing is, at a very minimum, we left 16 points on the field. And
let's not forget one of the, I believe it was the field goal that Crosby nailed. James Jones did catch the ball in the end zone and just missed barely getting that second foot down in bounds.
Yep, that was their field goal right before halftime.
Yeah.
And so that would be 4 more. So if we went that way, then there's 20 points we left on the field. And how many do we lose by? 14?
37-13 final score.
Yeah, I mean, if we put those points on the board and we win the game. So I don't think that we were outplayed and made to look like we suck, because I don't think we suck. And I think Scott Tolzein went in there and actually played a heck of a game. We look at it again, he had to do the same thing Seneca Wallace did, and I thought he played very well.
Yeah, the only difference is, your Seneca Wallace is a 11, 12-year veteran. He's been around the block a few times, and you got a guy like Scott Tolzein, who undrafted free agent. The Packers pick him up from the 49ers, put him on the practice squad, and a week ago today, this time last week, he was sitting on the Packers practice squad. He just got caught up, I believe, on Wednesday.
Yeah,
so very impressive by him.
And honestly, the Packers, the way that they made it sound, the way that Aikman made it sound, is that either way he was going to be on the 53-man roster because the Browns wanted to claim him off the practice squad.
Yeah.
So
the Browns tried claiming him, and the Packers blocked it by giving Tolzein a raise, and Tolzein chose to stay. And then they ended up calling him up due to Rodgers' injury. And
so that tells me right there the Packers have faith in Scott Tolzein. They see something. And you know what? People were asking me today, who the heck is Scott Tolzein? I knew him from the Badgers.
Same here.
You knew him from the Badgers. Packer fans know him from the Badgers. And do I think that he has all the qualities to be an elite quarterback in the NFL? I don't know. But I thought he did very well for the situation he was thrust into, and he deserves to start next week.
He has been named the starter by McCarthy yesterday in the press conference. He opened it up post-game, named Tolzein the starter.
And that tells me even if Wallace's growing injury is better, which we don't think it is based on them bringing quarterbacks in to try out, but even if he was healthy, that tells me that McCarthy has a lot more faith in Scott Tolzein right now than a veteran in Seneca Wallace.
Yeah, what the offense that the Packers are going to need to do, and they did yesterday, is that ball control offense where they run the ball a lot. That's an offense Tolzein's familiar with. As Wisconsin, he had P.J. Hill, John Clay to just give the ball to and let them do their thing, and then he threw when he needed to guys like Nick Toon and Owen Daniels, I believe, was on those Badger teams with him. Maybe he was a senior. I forget exactly, but all he had to do is hand the ball off and throw it when needed, and that's what he's going to be asked to do right now in Green Bay.
Yeah, and we found out that when we got behind and he had to throw every time, it wasn't the prettiest thing. He doesn't have the prettiest delivery in the world, doesn't have the tightest spiral in the world. And did you see his one scramble? He has the most awkward running, form that I've ever seen in my life. But
it looked as awkward as Nick Foles yesterday, but
yeah,
Nick Foles got them the first down though.
I could get into that right now, but I want to stick on the Scott Tolzein thing because I think a lot of people don't know who Scott Tolzein is. For those listeners that might not be Packer fans, I have some faith in Scott Tolzein, and my outlook has not changed, Evan. I think we can beat the Giants. I think we can beat the Vikings. It doesn't matter if Scott Tolzein is in there because I think, like you said, Eddie Lacy, we ran the ball and controlled. The time of possession in the first half was outrageous. Now we just got to finish the drives.
Yeah, at the end of the third, I believe it was the end of the third quarter, when you looked at time of possession, the Packers controlled the ball for 30 minutes, and the Eagles were at 15.
Yeah, and so if we just finished the drives, like we just talked about a little bit ago. We left too many points on the field. Had we put points on the board, that fourth quarter is totally different.
It is.
And so,
Tolzein can do though whatever. Tolzein can move the ball at will up and down the field, but if our defense can't make stops in crucial times and not let receivers run wide open in the middle of the field, and then have two guys go for an interception and nobody get it. If the defense can't make stops, it doesn't matter if the offense does though.
Yep, and that's where you're leading right into where we're going now. So, offensively, I still think we're okay. I'm not even upset with the 13. Yeah, I'm upset we didn't finish the drives, but we moved the ball, and we can do the same thing against the Giants. We can do the same thing against the Vikings. But like you said, we had no pressure on Foles yesterday, and it was very evident. He was then finding the opening in the zone, and then you mentioned it early in the recap. We couldn't tackle worth a crap yesterday. I mean, it was like we forgot how to tackle after I had just praised them the previous 3 weeks. It's like they forgot how to tackle. So let me ask you this. How does that happen, Evan? We've seen this now roller coaster of mentalness all year on the defense. We talked about it early in the rambles. We've got to get more tough. We've got to get mentally, secure to tackle. And we did it. And we were playing great ball. We were getting pressure on the quarterback. We were tackling. And now, all of a sudden, the offense did their part yesterday. They controlled the ball. And then the defense goes out, and they can't stop them. And they're scoring at, like, in 2 minutes, if that. So how does that happen?
Well, Casey Hayward coming back from injury is supposed to be a huge plus to the defense, which he again got hurt yesterday. And it didn't look good to me. I don't expect to see Hayward play again this season. That's just my opinion. But Hayward comes back against Chicago, and Hayward's not tackling well. Tremont Williams making an effort but not tackling well. The guy who was playing during those games when we were applauding their tackling was Micah Hyde. And I don't recall seeing Micah Hyde out there on defense very often the past 2 games. I know he's now become an important piece on special teams, but Micah Hyde is a sure tackler. He makes the tackle. He wraps the guy up and gets him to the ground. And with, Hayward back there, it hasn't been happening. And I don't know why. It's like, okay, now we don't know how to tackle. And I need to see Micah Hyde play more. I need to see, Brad Jones does his best, but Latimer, when he was playing, with Jones hurt, Vladimir was wrapping people up and getting them to the ground. A.J. Hawk was playing some of his best football with Vladimir next to him. And it's like, why change up what's working? And I know, you always say a guy can't lose his job to an injury, but why change up what's working if obviously, and those guys are doing so well? Why change it up? Play Hyde more, play Vladimir more. They're sure tacklers.
Oh, they really are. And I agree with you 100%. We were getting pressure on the quarterback a few games ago, and we were getting pressure without having to blitz a lot. And now all of a sudden, I didn't think the Eagles' offensive line was that great, and Peters even got hurt.
Yeah, former Packers played left tackle for them for a while, Alan Barbary, and he couldn't stick in Green Bay, and that was when the Packers' offensive line was at its worst.
And even getting Clay Matthews back, and I know he was one-handed, probably slowed him down a little bit, but you thought that would warrant a little bit of enthusiasm, a little bit of a motor. But, man, we made that offensive line and made Nick Foles look like that offense was great. And, they're okay. They got weapons. But I don't think that we should have allowed what we did. I mean, we left way too many lanes open. We weren't getting the pressure we needed to. And it's frustrating to watch that. Because I don't know what ramble it was, but you had mentioned offense has to help the defense. Defense has to help the offense. Well, yesterday, the defense let us down.
Yeah.
And the offense did. I mean, it didn't finish drives. Don't get me wrong. But
yeah. Well, 21 of the 27 points the Eagles had were Nick Foles basically just throwing it up in the air. The first touchdown by Riley, Riley is on the ground when he catches it and just rolls into the end zone.
Yep, and then the
touchdown to Deshaun Jackson was almost intercepted, and Nick Foles just throws it up in the air, and it bounces off Tremont Williams and Morgan Burnett right into Jackson's hands. And the other touchdown to Riley, I forget who the safety was on that. I think it might have been M.D. Jennings. Bites on the post route and leaves a post corner wide open, and Riley walks to the end zone.
Yeah, I mean,
21 points were off big plays.
Yeah, which we should be. I mean, every once I can see one. Okay, that first one I saw it, and I'm like, oh, great. I mean, bad bounce. How lucky can he get? Blah blah. But then you're right. The throw to Riley when it's right there. I mean, how do you let that happen? Because it wasn't like it was thrown in stride. I mean, Riley had to adjust to the ball, so why are we not adjusting and making a play on the ball?
Yeah.
That is very frustrating from my standpoint. But where I think we need to go back to, and I think you alluded to it, we've got to get the guys in there that want to play and tackle. I mean, if we can tackle, I'm okay with them completing a 6-yard pass because we're going to tackle them. The yards after a catch, killing us. They're just killing us. And there was a couple times that I think it was Morgan Burnett when LaShawn McCoy had the read on the play in the backfield, and McCoy broke it out for like 15 yards. Do you remember that play?
I know exactly what play you're talking about. It was on he was right into the left. Burnett had him in the backfield, stopped. And he bounces off of Burnett, turns the corner, and gets 15. I know exactly what play you're talking about.
And
I think it might have been fourth quarter, no, the second half.
And I mean that's frustrating when Don Capers calls the perfect play to stop the run, and we can't tackle him. And that's where I get frustrated because I've heard the people say, well, Dom Capers in his scheme and Dom Capers in this. Well, Dom Capers doesn't tackle. I mean, he's got a coach to tackling, don't get me wrong. But
it's not Capers that's teaching the tackling. It's supposed to be the position coaches that's teaching the tackling.
Exactly. And so I don't want to hear this stuff. Well, the scheme, we got to change the scheme. No, we got to tackle. Bottom line.
The scheme, I'm starting to get a little tired of the scheme. To be honest, I'm starting to get tiresome of it. And it's mainly because the scheme works against teams with bad quarterbacks or mediocre wide receivers, but the decent quarterback or good wide receivers, which Eagles have a very good wide receiver in Jackson, Deshaun Jackson, they tend to kill the Packers, and that's what's starting to tire me, but I didn't mean to cut you off on your thought.
No, that's fine, bud. That's fine. I love where you're going with that because that leads me into probably my last question. We wanted to try to cap it at 15. We're about 18 right now. We always joke. You and I could talk another 2 hours. But that leads me to this, though. The scheme that we're running is part of it, though, like you mentioned before. What if we put different players in the scheme because the scheme has worked? And I know the better quarterbacks and the receivers find the holes, but I'm starting to look at some of these veterans and say, if you're going to play that way, maybe we got to make a change. So do you think maybe different players in that scheme can revitalize it, or do you really think that we need to look at something else differently from a scheme perspective?
Well, if they're going to stick with the scheme they have, they don't run a lot of, they're a 3-4 team, but they don't run a lot of 3-down linemen. You have Ryan Pickett, B.J. Raji, Johnny Jolly. Great stuff in the run. But the Packers, most of the time, run a 2-man defensive line. And, Mike Daniels and Dayton Jones has been, they had really strong games yesterday. Jones had 2 sacks, and I believe Mike Daniels had 1. They played really strong games yesterday. But if the Packers truly want to run that 3-4 scheme with the way they run it with a lot of nickel packages, they have to change up the D-line a little bit and change up the linebackers a little bit. Because you only have, the defensive linemen they have are more your run stuffers, like I was saying. And then the linebackers they have, outside of Clay Matthews, none of them are very good in coverage. Jones, Hawk, Nick Perry, whoever else you're going to put out there, they're not the best in coverage. Clay Matthews is the best in coverage, but he's also your best pass rusher. And then the safety position hasn't been the same since Sid Collins left. So I think if you're going to keep this scheme, you have to do a complete overhaul of the team, which, you have Raji and Pickett are both free agents at the end of the year, along with Jolly. I think you maybe keep one of those guys, maybe two, and focus on drafting linemen and linebackers that fit the 3-4 rather than drafting a guy and then saying, okay, you're going to do this, and it's not something that they're accustomed to doing. Otherwise, if you're going to keep this personnel intact the way it is, you got to change the scheme. So it's either change the personnel to fit the scheme you run or change the scheme to fit the personnel that you have. And at this point of the season, they have to change the scheme to fit the personnel that they have.
That's a good point. I can totally agree with you on that. And I think that's exactly what our listeners probably wanted to hear. But when I look at that, they had best do it soon because offensively, like I said, we've got two good opportunities coming up against the Giants and the Vikings to get to 7-4. And this would be a great time, I think. And I don't like to use the word experiment, but if there's ever a time to change a scheme to fit the personnel against a different team, I think we've got two opportunities because I had mentioned this last week. The reason I'm confident is that we can run the ball against the Giants. We can run the ball against the Vikings. Yep. That's why I feel confident with our backup quarterback in there.
I think we can run the ball against the Lions. We had success running the ball against the Lions a few weeks ago.
I agree there, but what it scares me, and we'll talk about this depending on the health and what's going on going into that week, is that against the Lions, who I think are playing really good football right now, they have a way of really disrupting a quarterback, and I think a veteran quarterback is what we need there, and that's where the concern would be for me. But if Scott Tolzein now has 3 games under his belt, he might be able to pull off something very good if we can sustain a run on Thanksgiving Day.
And then there's a very slight outside chance, but I don't think they rush him back for that game. There's a slight outside chance that 12 could be back. But with the way the Lions get after the quarterback, I don't think you risk Rodgers with that collarbone.
No, not with that line. And we'll talk about that when we preview that game. If it's not 100% and there's a chance he could get hurt again, you got to keep him on the bench. Yeah. Because... Oh, go ahead.
You finish.
I was just going to say we can't, like you said, depending on the whole situation. We don't know where we're going to be in 2 weeks. But if there's any chance of him injuring that collarbone again, are we really going to risk that? Because now you might be talking long term, more than just a season. You got to be very careful with the franchise quarterback. And people may argue with me. You may disagree with me, but let's say even if we are at that point 5-6, and they say, well, he's 75%, and I know the announcers will say, well, a quarterback at 75% is better than a backup that's only 50%. I don't agree with that in certain situations. This would be one of them. You really got to look at, can that person sustain more damage if they get hurt again? And if the answer is yes, then you've got to keep him on the bench. If there's no chance for injury or furthering the damage, then fine. But it's a collarbone. And if it's not healed correctly or properly, he's going to injure it again. And then we're really in trouble.
Yep.
So with that said, Bud, we're rolling up on 25 minutes. So I think we had a great Veterans Day, Red Light Sports Ramble. As always, I know Evan had mentioned it earlier in the Ramble, but I do thank all the veterans for defending this country, serving this country. Because of you, we get to do what we do today. So I do appreciate every veteran out there. Today's your day. God bless. Any closing comments, Evan?
Just to let our listeners know, if they haven't already heard, as you were talking before, Packers had Matt Flynn in today for a workout, and I guess John Skelton, formerly of the Arizona Cardinals, is flying in as well, just to update our listeners on the quarterback situation in Green Bay, and I guess they may work out some others as well. So it looks like Seneca Wallace's numbers in Green Bay, they days in Green Bay could be numbered.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, that'll be our teaser for tomorrow. We'll definitely talk about more of the quarterback situation, what's going on with the tryouts, and how we see that rolling out. So, again, folks, just so you know, 2 guaranteed days of my co-host Evan Witalison on the Red Light Sports Ramble every Tuesday and Thursday. But Evan and I were talking, we might make this an everyday thing if we can work out the times. So get used to both of us being on the phone, everyone. But with that said, we'll see you guys at the next red light.